Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the film entertainment program on Television 10. Its continuing mission to explore strange new films, to seek out the bizarre and the nonsensical, to boldly see what no man has seen before. Captain's log, stardate 19043.3. After my rash outburst in an empty alleyway, I now find myself aboard the starship Enterprise. After rediscovering my rationality, I have unexpectedly taken on the role of captain of this vessel. I'm taking advantage of the holodeck and have created a model of my former set within. Just as I left. That's nice. Hello, and welcome back to Real Talk. I'm your host, Andrew Vick, and man, oh man, has it been a crazy journey to get back here. We've had our ups and downs during the past 2 seasons, but it sure does feel good to be back in the studio once again. I've watched a lot of stuff in the last year, and while the quality is varied, the one thing that I've spent the longest amount of time with last year kept me very busy was something I actually started watching before the pandemic even begun. And that piece of media is a little TV show from the 90s known as Star Trek: The Next Generation. Yes, while everyone else at the beginning of last year was staying together through shows about gay tiger crime, I was over here watching TV about weird aliens and space politics. Sometimes life is just like that. But what had drawn me to this 33-year-old show? If you knew me before I started watching this show, you'd know that I prefer my Stars at War and wasn't really into this kind of stuff. Like, I never watched the original series from the 60s, and I only ever saw the 2009 film once, like 10 years ago, and I can't tell you a single thing that happened in it. But I wasn't completely unaware of this franchise. I know who Spock is, and I can do the little hand thing, and I'm pretty sure I've heard the word Klingon before. What I'm trying to say is I basically was going in blind with no idea what to expect, but let me tell you, I was hooked from the very first episode. So what's all this Trekkie nonsense about anyway? Essentially, the show has a very serialized format. It follows the adventures of the crew of the Starship Enterprise as they explore the galaxy to find new life and weird science stuff. Basically,
to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Every episode takes the viewer to a new corner of space and has the characters experience all sorts of different challenges, like strange technology, unfamiliar aliens, weird monsters, scientific anomalies. If you can think of it, there's probably an episode of Star Trek about it. But it's not just wacky hijinks. The show can actually tackle a lot of serious subjects too, but we can get more into that later. For now, let's talk about the characters. Thankfully, these characters are pretty simple, so this shouldn't take long. First, we have our de facto lead character, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played so wonderfully by Sir Patrick Stewart. He essentially takes charge in a lot of situations and does everything in his power to either talk his way out of a situation or try to find a suitable compromise. There is a lot of episodes where the climax is just him using his words to save the day, and it is amazing every time. The acting in the show has no right being this good. Then we have his right-hand man, William Riker. Riker seems like he was going to be the backup Kirk character if the audience didn't get attached to the bald diplomat, but he's still a likable ladies' man, but also a rationalist when it comes to dire situations. Then there's Picard's left-hand lady, Counselor Troi. She's an empath who can read minds and sometimes can act.
I'm coming, where are you?
I'm coming, where are you? Oh, hi, Mark. Jordan LaForge is the chief engineer who strikes out so hard with the ladies, he goes and creates a show about children's books.
Boy, would I love to be the first human to meet a being from another planet. Well, here's a book about a boy who got just that chance one spooky Halloween night.
Also, the character is blind, if you couldn't tell by the visor, and I'm amazed that the writers never used this blindness as a crutch. It feels like it could be so easy to just write a character like this who could mope and woe about never feeling whole and wanting to have his own eyesight. But whenever it's brought up in the show, he's just like, yeah, it'd be nice, but that's not important to me right now. We also have our chief security officer, Worf, who is there to be told his ideas are stupid.
Sir, it could be a dangerous mission. There may be the potential for combat.
That is not the purpose of the mission.
Still, to die a true hero.
Worf.
Data the android is a fun character, probably one of the most fun stories of a robot trying to become human, and his episodes can range from incredibly thought-provoking to very, very dumb. Chief Medical Officer Beverly Crusher works as an on and off again love interest for Picard, and then there's her son Wesley, who I don't hate, but I definitely understand why a lot of people hate Wesley. In a lot of the earlier episodes, he's basically written like a Mary Sue, which kind of gets annoying after a while. But he does eventually grow into a better person before leaving the ship after a few seasons and only appearing again in a few episodes afterwards. Season 3 onward, you'll probably like Wesley, but before then, maybe not so much. Now, since this is a TV show, it doesn't quite fit the format of one of my normal editorial reviews, so we're gonna do things a little differently. If I were to just talk about the show, I'd be doing a disservice to you guys because not all Treks are made equal. So to switch up the formula, I'm going to talk about each season individually in their own bite-sized bits. Let's get this started where it all boldly begins, Season 1. In hindsight, Season 1 of TNG is kind of bad. I still hold the premiere in good light because it did set up the general idea of the stories that would be shown going forward. But after that, things get really bad for a while. For starters, a lot of the stories they choose to tell in this season aren't exactly that well written. There's one episode where they're on this planet where it seems like a paradise, but if you break any of the rules, you get executed right away. And yet nobody is aware of this fact until Wesley breaks some glass and gets arrested. Like, why didn't you guys look that up? Also, Picard just casually breaks the Prime Directive a bunch of times. Oh, I forgot to mention, Starfleet has this super important rule called the Prime Directive where you can't interfere with cultures and governments that aren't involved in Starfleet. It becomes a good topic for debate in later seasons, but it's ignored a lot in this one. Also, every character is, like, in the mood all the time this season. There's always a strange amount of sexual tension between every character, and it's bizarre to watch unfold. Mr. Roddenberry, were you satisfied with your marriage? Most episodes this season also look super cheap. You'll start to notice really quick how often they stop at barren planets that are mostly covered in rocks. After I finished the show, I made my own personal list of all the episodes from best to worst, and let me tell you, a good majority of Season 1 episodes are near the bottom of it for me. Also, the writers are complete hypocrites because they write this world like it's beyond the systemic oppression and personal hatred for other people, but then they just have 2 episodes that are just full of sexism or racism? I'm not even kidding when I say that even the cast hates these episodes. I will say, though, that there are some bright spots in here that I still think fondly of. Data gets an evil twin brother who's a fun character. There's this episode with these aliens called the Binars. It's pretty entertaining. This season introduces us to Q, who's like this omnipotent trickster god who just wants to mess around with Picard. A whole internal conspiracy arc happens in the background, which was interesting to see unfold, climaxing with the goriest thing to ever be on the show. I'd show it, but is really, really gory, but I love it. Also, the finale of this season is fun. All about these people who are in cryostasis being rescued by the Enterprise, and it also reintroduces the Romulans, who are these evil Vulcans who hate Starfleet. Not a lot of this season is great, but sometimes you have to get through the growing pains to get to the good stuff. I'm gonna give Season 1 a 4 out of 10. Season 2 is an overall improvement from the previous season, but it's still got a few kinks to work out. I'll go through the gripes first this time, since it's a lot less than the stuff I really want to talk about. First off, Beverly was written out of the show because someone didn't like her or whatever, and she got replaced with Dr. Catherine Pulaski. Now, I may be the odd man out here, but I'm not a fan of Dr. Pulaski. She's a decent character, but I don't feel like she gels entirely well with the rest of the cast. Also, she's only in this season and then never mentioned again, so don't get too attached. Another gripe is how there are some stories in this season that are still not always fun to sit down and watch. I don't care about Wesley's crush on this girl who turns out to be a monster. This episode here is called The Outrageous Okana, and Okana isn't even that exciting of a character. Also, this season has the worst finale, and also what I believe to be the worst episode, Shades of Grey, and no, there is not 50 of them. Riker gets knocked out in this episode, and it basically becomes a 45-minute clip show, and I hate clip show episodes in TV. Like, I'm sorry, but unless your name is Phineas and Ferb, don't even bother trying to make a clip show episode. This is literally the only episode in the series that I turned off partway through just to move on because I could not stand it. But with that out of the way, the rest of the season is pretty darn good. The sets are a lot more dynamic and detailed compared to the simple rock planets of the previous season. I like the personal stories going on a lot more. Like Picard has an episode where he has to avoid getting married to Troy's mom. Riker argues with his father about not taking his own command. Data accidentally befriends a small child who is in danger of being killed by a natural disaster. Worf surprisingly has a former lover, and it's fun to watch two Klingons go at it while still having to work with each other. There's also some wild concept episodes in this season too. Geordi and Data accidentally create an AI in the holodeck that becomes self-aware and takes on the personality of James Moriarty. Data, Riker, and Worf end up trapped in a strange pocket dimension that was designed off a cheesy 20th century novel. Q comes back and gives the Enterprise its ultimate challenge by having them face off against probably the best Star Trek villains, the Borg. We'll get back to the Borg later, but they're essentially a race of computer people that assimilate species to grow in size. It's where that one line, "resistance is futile," is from. They're devoid of humanity, hubris, and they're absolutely unstoppable. One of Starfleet's biggest strengths is their ability to reason with other races, but the Borg cannot be reasoned with at all, and it makes them terrifying. This season also introduces us to Guinan, who's clearly so emotionally and intellectually above everyone else that every scene with her is engaging. And fun fact, Whoopi Goldberg is apparently a big Star Trek fan, and she just really wanted to be on the show. Go figure. Season 2 also has the first episode I paused immediately after the credits rolled because I just had to sit there and go, wow, that was some amazing television. And that episode is Measure of a Man, in which Picard goes to trial to prove that Data has the rights of any other being and he's more than a simple machine. Trust me, if Season 1 made you rethink watching the rest of the series, please put on this episode because I think after you'll find that there's a lot more going on under the hood than there was a whole season ago. I'm going to give Season 2 a 7 out of 10. I'm not going to lie, guys. When the only things I don't like are a bunch of random minor things that just bother me and only one episode out of 25 other ones, I think this was a pretty good season. Much like Season 2, there is a massive jump in quality, not only in effects, but in writing and acting. I feel like I can't emphasize enough that when the acting in the show is good, it's really freaking good.
Or it may have nothing to do with it at all.
You honestly think Q is telling the truth?
Oh, I agree this is highly unlikely, but we have to proceed with our current dilemma as though Q is powerless to prevent it, don't we?
And there he sits and he watches us struggle.
I don't see that we have any choice.
At this point, you've come to learn about who the characters are, and you like just about all of them. Not only does Crusher return for good, but at this point, Wesley has become less of a Mary Sue character, and it feels like he fits in naturally with the rest of the cast. At this point, the writers have established these people enough where they can just start putting them in all sorts of different stories, and by God, many of the best episodes of Star Trek start popping up in the season. We have an episode in which Picard is accidentally seen by a proto-Vulcan culture, and they see him as like godlike figure, and the characters have to deal with the consequences of breaking the Prime Directive. Q gets plopped onto the bridge without his powers and has to figure out what to do with his life. You can really tell the writers knew what they were doing by having Q, the formerly omnipotent god who loathes humanity, team up with Data, the android whose life goal is to become more human. There's also episodes that focus a lot more on the emotional states of people, like how this kid has to deal with trauma after his mother dies on a mission, or how Spock's father is slowly succumbing to a mental disorder that is causing him to lose control over his emotional state. All of this ultimately climaxes in the season finale, The Best of Both Worlds, Part 1. In this episode, Riker is under threat of having a much more ambitious member of Starfleet take over his job because he has barely progressed in his career. At the exact same time, the Borg make a return in force as they track down the Enterprise and kidnap Picard. They transform him into their leader, which leaves Riker in command with the ship he wants and with the people he wants to work with. His literal best of both worlds. And it all ends with him essentially about to pull the trigger on Picard.
Mr. Worf. Fire.
Now, let me just state for the record that while I think this episode is really good, the tension of the situation was kind of ruined for me because I was able to just hop right into part 2 when the episode ended. I imagine that this probably blew people's minds back in 1990 because they had to wait a whole 3 months to find out whether or not Picard dies. It's not the show's fault, but just something I thought I needed to put out there. But enough of that. 9 out of 10, an excellent improvement. Spoilers, Picard doesn't die, he actually gets rescued, but Season 4 is still pretty darn good. I actually have to say that Season 4 probably has one of the better opening runs out of all the seasons in the show's run. It opens up with the finale of the biggest event in sci-fi, and then follows it up with an episode that slows down the action and takes its time to deal with the consequences of Best of Both Worlds. It may not sound like a very fun episode to have our protagonist out of duty and having to reconnect with his estranged brother, but it's still engaging because we also get to see the trauma that will probably stay with Picard for the rest of his life after having been assimilated.
They took everything I was. They used me to kill and to destroy, and I couldn't stop them. I should have been able to stop them. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good enough. I should have been able to stop them. I should.
So, my brother is a human being after all.
The thing that comes to mind to me when I think of Season 4 is how many of the episodes are spotlights on the inner thoughts of our characters. A lot of the episodes this season focused on personal relationships, and usually these episodes are never dull. I say usually because while there aren't as many bad stories as previous seasons, there are a few that stick out. In the episode Remember Me, Dr. Crusher gets trapped in a pocket dimension that's slowly closing in on itself, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, this show spouts out a lot of technobabble, but you can usually follow along well enough. This episode escapes me, though. I have no clue how any of this works. In theory, this episode, Data tries romance, and it's not very fun to sit through. Also, while I love Q-based episodes, Cupid really doesn't do it for me personally. To contrast the weaker episodes, the writers do something brilliant by having every other episode slap. There's an episode where Riker has a concussion and wakes up 16 years later and he's in command of the Enterprise. The Wounded introduces us to the Cardassians, who are basically psychopaths, but the Federation has to maintain a paper-thin peace with them. Devil's Due is a fun episode where Picard has to convince this government that a woman who claims to be the devil is a fraud. Don't even get me started on the drumhead. Season 4 has some low points, but the high points are just as good. 8 out of 10, a very good follow-up to Season 3.
Not so fast, buddy.
What the heck is going on here?
This is a hostage situation, and you're my wager.
Hang on a minute. Charlie Roker, one half of Sounds of the Valley?
That's right, buddy. I'm here on a quest of vengeance. Not only to fulfill your contractual obligation to suffer every 15 to 30 minutes of screen time.
Wait, that's a thing?
Yeah, here. Are you ready?
You know what? That makes a lot of sense.
That's not what we're here for. I'm getting my vengeance for the time you slaughtered me with sauce at the Williams.
Put it on the blue. We'll put this on the Blu-ray. No caption, just this. I think you've had enough. That was over a year ago.
Indeed. And now, you must pay the price.